Can you all hear me? Okay? Okay, awesome. Thanks. Well, thanks for coming. I hope I can share something with you that will be of value to you. I do not claim to be a user experience expert. Something I've been studying for a while now, and I thought in order to learn better, I will try to share a few of the things that I've learned. At least something that we can do within a 45, 50-minute session. So user experience is a pretty broad field. In fact, it's a field that I think is still, while it's been around for a little while, still fairly nascent and just starting to take off. The idea that you can make apps much easier to use. I think the mobile phone has propelled all of us web application folks to try to be a little better at building applications. Seems like there's a little feedback here. So anyway, give you a little background on myself. I've been in the computer industry for well over 20 years. Spent first part of my career in Silicon Valley, came out to work here with Novell and WordPerfect, and then have done a bunch of startups. And I was recruited about 3 years ago to work for Bluehost, to run their development team, and then since then we've kind of reorganized, and I'm now running the web application team for Bluehost's parent company, called Endurance International. So, let's get started. So anyway, you know, when we first started off building web apps, the big thing was to try to get stuff to actually work. And we were excited when we could actually get, start doing some pretty cool things. But that's no longer really what's required. Today's, it's also now about making it super easy to use. And that's what user experience is all about. It's really trying to focus on how can we make it easy so the user can achieve their goals very quickly. Now for some of us developers, this can be a bit of a challenge because we're really good at left brain stuff. Very logical, methodical, solve technical problems with code. Sometimes some of this UI stuff takes a fair amount of design. And if you're lucky and have good designers, it may not be a big deal. But that's not always the case. So I personally believe that it is possible to start developing, if you haven't already, some of the right brain kinds of things. Things that will help you to start seeing things that maybe you didn't see before. Some of the things I'm going to share with you are fairly common sense, but you may not have thought of them. Not a lot of feedback here. You may not have thought of them in this way. So hopefully that can help. For some of you, though, you may be going, I'm really hardwired to solve technical problems. And I don't know about this right brain stuff. But actually, I think really you can be, even if you don't become a graphic designer. And that's not the goal here. The goal is not to turn you into graphic designers per se. Well, that's a great profession. What we really are trying to do here is to figure out how can we make our application so easy to use that it almost requires no training. So much so that the users get incredible satisfaction out of using our applications. And the thing I'm like super excited about web apps today because we're on the verge of being able to do pretty much almost anything you can do on a desktop app, you'll be able to do on a web app. We're that close. Single page apps, web components, some of the cool new technologies coming out are going to give us that capability. So we need to make them feel like an easy to use desktop app. Now there's really, the thing I'm going to talk about a lot, there's maybe one key principle I want you to walk away from this talk from. And that one principle is cognitive friction. We're going to talk about what cognitive friction is and why it's important to get rid of it as much as possible. There's really a couple of different types of friction. Emotional friction may not be something people see too much with a web application, or it probably maybe more example could be reading a news site, I'm reading a news story, and the story talks about something that maybe I had some personal experience with, and it brings out some emotions that might kind of jam me up in terms of being able to use the site. That's not something we're going to focus a whole lot on. We're going to focus on cognitive friction and how to get rid of it. Because what that does is it slows the user down from being able to use your application and getting their job done. So we're going to define user experience, or UX for short, as the measure of friction between a user and their goal, no matter what the goal is. For some reason, this GIF doesn't want to work. The cool thing is that if we really achieve our goal, users get really, they actually like using our app. And the thing is that delighted customers are the best customers because they're the ones that spread the news. They're the ones that say, hey, you got to try this app, it's really cool. Okay. Hopefully they'll eventually look like that. I teased, I actually gave this to a few of my developers yesterday, and I said, this is one of my developers. In fact, the guy that came down here and did the wave thing, this is him most of the time. Okay, so what we have to do is kind of a mind shift of how we code the front end. Basically, what we're really trying to do now is code for the human brain. We're trying to figure out how do people work with a user interface, and how can we make it so easy that they can get their job done and get out fast. So some of the times when you're actually coding, we try to code for what is efficient for us to get the job done, make it happen. But that doesn't necessarily translate always into a good user experience. So we need to stop some of the time and think, okay, is this the right way to build this for the user? So, what's our goal? Reduce cognitive friction. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of things first. One are common traps that you see in some of the web applications. Now, some of the examples I'm going to show you are fairly old. Some of them are not and should have been fixed. But hopefully you can see the problem with the applications that I'm going to show you. Okay, this app actually is, it's got nice colors, pretty well laid out, but it's got too much going on. Now, if first time you saw this app, where did your eyes go? They're trying to figure out where to go. It's like there's so much stuff going on here, I don't know where to focus. So putting too much on the screen is one of the common problems. Okay, this is one of our problems. Exposing technical jargon to the user. Now, the interesting thing, I've been in web hosting for a while now, and when web hosting first came out about 10 plus years ago, most of the people doing it were pretty technical. So you could do this kind of stuff. You can't do this anymore because most of the users we sign up today, they don't have a clue what a 301 redirect is versus a 302. So you got to be careful about the jargon you use. We're going to have to fix this one. Whoops, sorry. Okay, another one. Throwing up just lots of columns with lots of data, making them think like a DBA to try to translate and figure out what it means. That's another problem that we got to try to avoid. Okay, here's one that I love. Trying to jam as much on the screen as possible. Can't have any white space. It's got to, we got to maximize the use of that screen. It's got to be above the line, right? Above the fold. So we can't put anything down below. Here's the one that I think a lot of us fall into a trap. We ourselves tend to be pretty heavy power users. And we like to code for ourselves, right? But we're not the customer most of the time. Sometimes you are. Sometimes your target audience is the developer. Okay, that's fine. But most of the time it's not. And so we got to be careful about coding for the edge cases or the power user. We really need to code for the masses, the people, for the most part, that are going to buy our application. And then you can expose ways for the power user to get to those advanced features. But that's not your primary target. This, by the way, how many of you fly United? I used to live in Denver, so I flew United all the time. It's actually a pretty good airline, but their website sucks. Not counting the ads, I counted 7 different font types on this thing. You add in the ads, and it's over a dozen. It is the most confusing airline app or website I've ever seen. And then here's one that's really fun. See if you can see how many different search boxes there are. How many do you count? There's 3. Which one is the customer supposed to use? Notice how many copy tabs there are. Anyway, this one, of course, is kind of a mess. Okay, so what we want to try to do, as a quick summary of what we just reviewed, is we want to present data that's very meaningful to the customer. We don't want to overwhelm them with too much, just enough. We want to use terms they'll understand. Give them just enough information. You don't need to overwhelm them. Code for the common user, and be very consistent throughout the app. In terms of like fonts, for example, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about typography, but you really only want to pick a few fonts in maybe 3 or 4 different sizes, and then stay consistent. Don't jam all over the place. This is what's amazing is how much they put on one page. You can imagine if you went through the site, how many more you might see. And then make sure your UI looks clean. Okay, so that's the common pitfalls. I'd also like to spend a few minutes talking about some of the myths. Now, the interesting thing about some of these myths is that when the internet, well, I don't want to say first took off because that's almost 20 years ago now, but even as much as a decade ago, some of the rules were quite different than they are today. And so we need to be careful getting into this old mindset of things not changing. Let me give you a few examples of that. Oops, wrong one. Okay, it used to be that the number of clicks was like king. Got to keep the number of clicks down really low. Not necessarily anymore. If you can help your user get through to their goal as quickly as possible, maybe it takes 3 or 4 clicks, it's not a big deal. People don't even really think about it anymore as long as it's intuitive. So clicks, not quite as important anymore as facilitating getting to the goal as easily as possible. Here's one of my favorites. Can't have any wasted white space. We got to cram in as much as possible. The interesting thing about white space is that if you look at some of these sites of the premium vendors like Apple, Apple compared to any of the PC manufacturers, for example, if you're looking at just at laptops, they're a premium vendor. They cost a lot more than standard PCs. If you look at them from a phone point of view, you can get a lot cheaper phone from other vendors. So they're a premium player. Look at their website. They have a lot of white space. White space kind of suggests a nice quality, a higher quality, luxurious quality. So it's not bad to have white space. It also calms the mind, makes it easier for people to find things because their eyes don't have to go over all the place to find something. Another one is you can't scroll. It's got to be above the line or above the fold. That used to be definitely the case. And so you try to really be careful that you put the most important things up at the top. But that's not true anymore. How many of you are template developers? Okay, there's a number of you. How many templates can you find today for any of the major CMSs that are single page templates? They're all over the place. So this is not a bad deal anymore. Just about I'm a big fan of Foundation. I know some people love Bootstrap. Bootstrap's good. I love Foundation. Their websites, a lot of scrolling. So Now, the one thing you want to try to avoid is horizontal scrolling. The only time I've found that that's probably works is if you're on a mobile phone and you need to see a big table. It's okay to scroll there, but it's kind of about the only case I've seen where it makes sense. But horizontal scrolling's fine. Vertical scrolling's fine. Small details don't matter. Small detail, turning off the, no, I'm just kidding. This is actually quite a good, I want to not suggest anything negative about this. It's actually from Domo, the guys up in American Fork. It's actually really clean design. Very good use of color, a nice layout, lots of white space, it's clean. They took a lot of attention to detail. And so this idea that, well, we don't have to worry about all the little details, you really do. And it really shows. This app looks really clean and very nice. So I don't show all bad examples. Okay, this is actually another one of our sister groups. It's actually created at Bluehost, so we kind of take the blame. But let's say you're a novice user. You don't really have a clue which CMS to use to build your website, and you come into this page. Which one are you going to pick? Yeah, maybe you've heard of WordPress, and so you just go with the first one. But way too many options. The more options present, the harder it is for customers to choose.
Why are there obsolete ones on there?
They're open source. Those are all open source tools. So another one is thinking that, well, customers really know what they want, so we'll just throw them all up there and it won't really matter because they know what they want. They'll pick. But they don't always know what they want. They don't even always know. So it's hard for them to necessarily know what they want. This isn't a web app, it's a web page. But where does your eye go on this page? There's 16 different options on this page. Where do you want your customers to go? I mean, initially you see this 40% off thing, which is cool, but then you start going all over the place, and you're immediately distracted. So we need to be careful about how many, what do we got going on, and users do really care what your apps or your website looks like. And then here's the last myth: it's got to look like Apple. I don't know personally about Google. I don't think their UI is all that great. But, Apple, Amazon. This is an old Amazon page. And not about you, but it's got just way too much going on. So I don't know that I really want to copy Amazon. And besides, that may not be our target customer. They may have a different target customer than we do. So why do we want to copy one of the big guys? Our marketing department, these guys are in love with Apple. And every time they come out with some cool new thing on their website, oh, it's got to look like that. Yeah, but we're not Apple. Anyway, the good thing about Amazon is they've actually cleaned up their act. Their site looks more like this now. So it's much cleaner, fewer choices, it looks good, it's laid out nice, great color. So they've learned as well. Okay, so let's go back to our goal. Lower cognitive friction. We're trying to get rid of all the things that slow people down from achieving their goal using our applications or website. Okay, so why is cognitive friction such a bad thing? Well, first of all, it makes people use more brain cycles than they really want to. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty lazy. And when I go into a new site or a new app, I just want it to figure it out really quickly and start using it. I don't want to have to learn how to do something. The second thing is it breaks the user's flow. They're trying to figure out how to whatever, and their mind is like, I don't know what to do. So you're breaking up there's actually a guy who's one of the, I think, better user experience guys, a guy named Steve Krug, I believe is his last name. He wrote a book called Don't Make Me Think. Well, that's really what you want. You don't want to have to cause your users to think. You want it to just be automatic. Okay, so what are some of the things that cause cognitive friction? Now, you probably saw from some of the examples we've already seen, putting too much stuff on the screen and that kind of jazz. This is one that we have a problem with. Performance. Don't you love it when you, for us, we actually use a product called cPanel inside of for our control panel, and then we build all this stuff around it to try to make it easier, and you don't have to log in twice. But when you switch from our stuff to cPanel, it's like, you can almost go get a cup of coffee and come back and, you're finally there. Something we've trying to work on. Another thing is the app becomes too difficult to use. Some apps, when they first start out, they're actually pretty simple, but over time, they just get harder. This is like our internal customer support app. When it first started out, there was no real goal to build this expansive thing. It was just going to do a couple things. Well, over time, it just got layered and layered and layered. Now it's like this super confusing application. In fact, in some cases, it kind of looks like this. It became too complicated. What are you going to fill out on this one? That's a pretty heavy-duty app. Lots of buttons and fields and tabs, and glad I don't have to use this. And then, of course, again, too many choices. There's an interesting, there's a guy named, forget his first name, but Hicks Law. He came out with he did a study, and came up with this: the amount of time it takes somebody to accomplish something goes up in this kind of a fashion as the number of choices go up. And if you're trying to get somebody to get something done quickly, this is something you want to try to minimize, especially for the novice user. If your target is the novice, go and give them a couple choices, explain what they are, and then for the advanced guy, there's another button over here so they can go pick this other thing that's most people don't use, but they like it because it's super powerful. Let's see, yeah. Okay, so let's look at some things that we can do with our applications to try to cut down the amount of cognitive friction. Grab a quick drink here. Okay, first of all, before we talk about that, something you probably don't even think about, but as you look at this, it's like, oh yeah, our eyes can only really focus in high definition in one kind of small area. So when we're looking at a screen for the first time of an app, you see high def in one, and so wherever your eye is drawn to, that's in high def. Everything else is in peripheral vision, which is low definition. And we're going to talk about what happens when they need to see something that's kind of out here, what you can do about that. But it's important to understand that that's where people are going to see the most clearly. Now, high resolution takes more brain cycles than peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is important still, though, because it gives context, gives a meaning. I need to see the whole thing, and then I can kind of figure it out. And it takes a lot less brain power to use peripheral vision. It's actually a pretty good design. It's pretty well laid out. It's got nice use of color. And we're trying to hire some UX design companies for a new project we've got. And I interviewed 7 companies and looked at a lot of different designs because I was trying to find some that I thought could be relevant to some of the things that we may want to do down the road. And as I was going back through some of my UX materials, trying to see, also kind of prepare for this presentation, it was pretty interesting how some of the designs fit some of the recommendations pretty well. One of the things is we love to see shapes that we quickly recognize. Squares, rectangles, circles, and this one's got all kinds of that. And so it's very easy to recognize some of this stuff. Now, it'll take you a second. You have to know the context of what all these charts and graphs are. But assuming that we did know that, this would probably be pretty easy to figure out. This is another design that I saw from one of the firms. Lots of white space. Pretty easy to figure out, what you need to do. Click here to subscribe. And it's got your billing history. Pretty easy. So there's not a lot of stuff. It's not jam-packed with lots of options. Lots of white space. White space basically calms the mind, and it takes a lot of, it basically makes it easy to focus on what we need to focus on. Here's a really interesting example from Apple, Premiere. A lot of white space. And I could have gone down the whole, the rest of the page, but it's loaded with white space. And they try to make things look really awesome, so you're willing to spend more money buying their stuff. Lots of white space. So white space is good. Okay, another one that's important is our shapes. This particular layout, there's a lot of stuff here, but it's laid out very nicely. You got a left-hand tab, navigation. You've got tabs. You've got sections that use color. There's space between them. Well laid out. It wouldn't be too hard to figure out what to do here. So think in terms of how to organize the elements on the page using whether it's grouping stuff by color, by shape, excuse me, by space, to kind of separate. The tabs, they don't have a whole lot of space between them, but there's just enough to know, okay, these are tabs. If it was a bar all the way across, you wouldn't know that. So very good use of, and when you got a lot of stuff and you're repeating, you really do need to have clear spacing so you can figure out that they are different things. Okay, here's a bad example, another one from us. We've actually fixed this page, but this is the way it kind of used to look like. For me, misaligned elements is like fingers on a chalkboard. This page used to drive me out of my mind. There's about 5 different places where things are out of alignment. And I finally got the devs to fix it. It used to drive me insane. Alignment hacks are kind of subconscious, and yet they can be distracting. They can slow the user down. And the user doesn't necessarily know why, but it doesn't, I don't know that happens to everybody, but one of the guys that I was reading a book about, UX stuff, he was like, this is the silent UX killer, is having stuff out of alignment. Even a single pixel can do it. That's not working, darn it. There it goes. This isn't a very good example, but remember when your mind focuses on what's right, what's just this central peripheral is high def and everything else is low def. If you need to get somebody to focus on something that may be out in that peripheral vision, sometimes movement, a little bit of attention getting things can help, focus on what they need to focus on. The most important places on the page, by the way, are in the top left corner and the bottom right corner. Your eyes kind of naturally, this is Western, it's probably different in the East, but your eyes naturally go like that. So the worst place to put stuff is in the bottom left. Some of our sport guys wanted to put this tool that they could easily create what they call these walk me's, where it would help walk the new user through how to do stuff. It would show them what to click, and well, they put it down in that bottom left area, and that's like the worst place in the world to put it. I said, you guys got to put some animation on that because most people don't even see it. They were worried that animation would, bother us, but we said most people aren't. A lot of people aren't using it because they can't see it. So sometimes you do have to use attention and animation. Color's a fun one. Some people probably love the colors here. You can probably see it better on these guys. The colors drive me crazy. I'm not a big fan of opposite color, although I know green and red, Christmas, but I don't like opposite colors. You can come up with color combinations that can be a real challenge. There's a really cool website that Adobe's put together. It used to be called Cooler. They've changed the name. How many are familiar with Cooler? Okay, quite a few of you are. It's a great place to go test out colors. They actually have these different color rules. This one's the complementary, which is the opposites. I don't know why they put that one in there, but I guess some people like that. But color, these colors here are pretty, they kind of clash with each other, I think. But you can, you could say, okay, well, this is pretty powerful. Let's lighten this up. I can also kind of drag things here. I mean, color is based on a number of different things. This is a RGB type thing, so which is very common for screens, not for print, but screens. But it's not just the hue that matters. It's also the lightness and the intensity of the color. And so sometimes you can play with that too and still be able to use like opposites. They also have this thing called Explore, which is pretty cool because they do have a lot of different options. Now some of them I don't think are very good. But they have a lot of different color options here that are, pretty cool. So if you are trying to figure out, what's the best colors for a particular page or app or whatever, this can be a good tool to help you figure that out. But you got to be careful with color. There's also the challenge with color blindness. About 8% of the males in the U.S. are colorblind, and there's 3 different types of color blindness. So that's a tough one to test for. I don't really know any great color blindness sites. There are some if you just do a Google search, but they're pretty outdated and old. I haven't found any I really like. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, another one is to kind of walk the user through steps, especially if it's a little bit more complex set of steps. Of course, numbers are great, wizards. Sometimes you can put an overlay on the screen that shows people where to go. This Walk Me thing was kind of a neat tool that we came up with. But this makes, for the user, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, okay, first I got to do this. And, if each step is really simple, it makes it very easy to achieve their goal. Especially useful for novice users who are starting out the first time. Okay, another one, progressive hack. Just-in-time manufacturing, all that concept also works great for information. We talked about this a little bit already. Don't overwhelm them with too much stuff. Show them just enough so that they can make a decision or figure out what they need to do. And then, if they need to, they can drill down and get more information. So focus on the common options first, and then make the advanced options available for those people that want to use it. These animated GIFs aren't working so well. Another thing that can help the user, kind of calms the mind, is to give them status. If it's going to take a little while, let's say to provision a new Linux server on a hosting platform that I just signed up for, let them know, okay, it's going to take about 45 seconds to, for this thing to accomplish, give them kind of a burn down, if you will. That'll kind of calm them down and let them know, okay, this is happening. That's always a good practice. Okay, another big one is don't expect your users to basically memorize how to do something. It's a bad assumption. Especially if they don't use the app very often. Like you go in once a month, pay your online bills or whatever. I know one of the guys in our group signed up for Adobe's Creative Cloud, and he became the administrator. And every month I have to go digging in this thing because they send him the emails on the receipts, and I have to turn in the receipts. Every month I go in there and I have to dig around trying to figure out how to get just a simple PDF of the invoice. You think Adobe would know how to build apps. It's really poor app. So Apple does a pretty good job on mobile. Of course, Android's kind of copied them now. Icons work great. Just various things that will help them quickly, I remember how to do this. Recognize as opposed to trying to remember how to do something. Okay. Mobile. How many of you guys are working on mobile apps, whether it's native or responsive web apps? Okay, do you think these principles apply to mobile? Yep. Oh, this one's not working either. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Every one of these, in fact, it's probably even a little harder with mobile because you got, in some cases, pretty small screens to work with. The interesting thing is that, when you're doing a responsive website, let's say, or an app, it's always mobile, tablet, desktop, or laptop. That's gotten kind of tricky because, look at the Samsung at the top, 720 by 1280, and compare that to the Kindle Fire, the second from the bottom, 600 by 1040, 24. These small phones now have better resolution than some of the tablets. So we can't use that notion of phone, tablet, laptop. It's now small, medium, and large. Because the lines are blurring, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The amount of pixels on these phones is getting denser and denser. Quality, of course, goes way up. So when we think about doing breakpoints for an app, you don't want to necessarily do it based on device. The best place to put breakpoints is really based on your app. Test it out. There's a number of really cool sites that will help you, and even the Google, the Chrome tools have got a mobile feature that will help you check out different screen sizes. And the best way to do it is get these ones that will automatically resize, or you can do it manually. And where you see the app look bad, that's where you want to put the breakpoint. It may not necessarily be right at 768 or right at 400 or right at 1024. It might be a little different for your app. So that's the better way to do it nowadays, which is quite a bit different than what we used to do. Another big concept is the idea of mobile first. It seems like most people do when they build an app or build a site that's going to be responsive, or initially it's not responsive, and then so they build the big one first, and then they say, okay, now we got to figure out how to make this thing work mobile. And if you look at your media queries, you start off with the big screen at the top of the page, and then as you go down, you're going down to the mobile device. Well, you end up replicating a ton of CSS doing it that way. If you actually flip it and do mobile first, and make your default be your smallest size that you're going to support, and then just do the changes when you get to the larger screen, the amount of CSS you need is substantially less. Now, I know this is a mind shift for a lot of us. I just started doing that, and I'm blown away at how much easier. Initially, trying to figure out mobile, though, is hard because mobile design patterns are completely different than big screen design patterns, and we got to get familiar with, well, how do I do that? And responsive web apps are not exactly the same as a native mobile app, but you can still learn a lot from the native mobile app, so there's still much to be done there. But once we do the hard one, then the other ones become a lot easier. Okay, images. This, of course, is much more of a problem for websites than it is for web applications. It's gotten a little better, but it's still not perfect. This is, in fact, probably one of the biggest challenges of doing mobile are images. There's a lot of different strategies. One strategy is, having a bunch of different images, and you basically define which one you're going to load with your media queries. Well, the problem with that is that some of the browsers have this feature that basically does a look-ahead pre-parser. And if you're not careful, it will still download every single image, even though you only want the little one. It downloads all of them. So you got to be really careful about, doing resolution switching or scoping images with media queries, because you may not be solving any performance problems with that. Picture element, that helps in some cases. For web applications, I would kind of probably stay away from images if you can, and stick with vector graphics. I know that the early Internet Explorers don't support it, so you may have to have a fallback if you still need to support those. But SVGs scale really nicely. And then, of course, for icons and stuff, go with a font icon. You can scale those, and they look great at just about any size. You can also theme them. You can do some cool stuff with icons. And there's all kinds of different icon libraries. Okay, another thing to consider is that when mobile first started to take off, we quickly adopted this paradigm that user input on a mobile phone was always touch, and that of course got adopted quickly for tablets. And for laptops and desktops, it was always keyboard mouse. Well, that's not true anymore. You can get keyboards with your phones, and you've got laptops now that also function as a tablet. My wife has a desktop that's also has a touch screen on it. So when you're building web applications, you also need to start taking into account, especially if your target may be somebody with a bigger screen, you also still have to probably consider touch, and start looking at the touch APIs that Apple and Google are supporting. So we can no longer assume that a certain screen size is going to always be either touch or keyboard mouse. They're interchangeable. And they're getting even more complex. Okay, so let's do a quick summary, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So in our presentation today, we talked about cognitive friction. And basically, the goal of UX is to minimize cognitive friction as much as possible. The other thing we want to do is to try to use methodologies or best practices to try to, cut that down as much as we can. And this applies really to all screen sizes, not just your typical bigger screen application. Now there's a number of things about user experience that I did not talk about. One of the big ones is testing. User experience is all about testing. For example, you would, let's say, you might even go watch customers first before you even start, wireframing or prototyping. Then you wireframe or whatever, test those out, go back, make changes, then start to build the app, and again, test it again. So it's all about testing, taking in feedback, making changes. So that's a big part of it as well. My slides are here, so you don't have to, you can just go grab them. These are online slides. They also want to have you provide feedback. There's a joined in link, so if you want to do that. These are some really good books. There's also lots of sites. I'm trying to get my daughter to become a UX designer, and just Sunday night I sent her a whole ton of links and online tutorials and all kinds of stuff to kind of start getting into it. So That's it. Any questions? Okay, like I said, I'm not an expert, but I can try to answer. Yes?
So something I'm dealing with right now is, as a developer, I'm helping the product team develop their UI. And so I do something, they say, no, not that. I do something else, they say, no, not that. What is the best strategy as developers would you suggest that we do when dealing with product people who don't know exactly what they want?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's difficult to give a general answer because some people have UI designers or graphic designers, and they have all types of different roles in the mix. The best thing to do is really to work together during the development of this. One of the challenges we've had is, I used to have graphic designers in my department, and the guys we hired, the marketing team loved them so much that they sucked them into marketing. And that became a real challenge. I had very little access to them. But if you can engage everybody in the process, because quite often graphic designers don't really understand how difficult to implement a specific feature. They also aren't necessarily great UX people. They look for really cool, looks awesome, but they don't realize this one feature may take forever to build, and it's not the return on investment to do it's not there. But if you can interact together during the process, then you can help them understand, or they can understand from your point of view, how quickly we can build this. Is this going to work? You can test out ideas. One thing you could do is just use paper to wireframe and just do a brainstorm session with yourself to wireframe all kinds of stuff, and then show them all these different options and try to get them to make a decision quickly. But yeah, that's a tough one. Every single company that you guys work in all have different challenges like this, and the best thing to do is to collaborate as much as you can during the process. Yes? Excellent idea. Did everybody hear that? That's a great idea. I love it. Yeah, put some stuff in there that they're going to want to take out, and then they feel like they contributed to the process. That's awesome. I'm going to use that one. That's great. Yes?
Would you mind adding a slide with all the sources that you gave to your daughter?
Oh, yeah, I'll do that.
And furthermore, it sounds like you come from an environment where you have customers that have to go through a process, but then when you throw on top of that SEO and all this other stuff, then no longer are you just trying to make the process cleaner and easier to get through.
Right.
You're also worrying about stickiness and whether or not they're getting the scent and all that other garbage. Does some of those the references that you have, do they deal with some of that?
Yeah, you still want to if it's a website and you're trying to get certain types of action, you still need to deal with how to make it as easy as possible. We got a couple of minutes. Let me tell you a story. I went to a UX conference just about a month ago, and one of the guys who heads up the company that puts on the conference, one of the interesting things, they were working with a very large customer. And the customer came to him and said, we have too many people when they hit the shopping cart are dropping off. And they said, okay, well, can you give us the data before they even get to the shopping cart? Well, they didn't have any of that. So they anyway went back and gathered all this data. And what they found out was that before a person could even get to the shopping cart, they had to sign up for an account. They were losing 50% of the people on the website by forcing them to set up an account. By putting in a checkout as a guest, they made over $1 billion the next year in sales.
We're going through that right now.
Speak into the microphone for me.
So,
Take that piece. back to the CEO of the company, please. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. I thought that, man, that was like, whoa, that was incredible. So they thought they needed to solve this one problem of dropping out of the cart. This other thing was 10 times worse. So, yeah, you definitely want to look at what's the end goal and how do we take the customer through that process as easily as possible. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
So the application I deal with is very data entry heavy. And so it's basically data entry, crunching, reporting. So a lot of the times we're trying to optimize, it's like, okay, here's a grid of data that they're trying to fill out. Trying to make it cleaner or easier or less intuitive, less friction. All of a sudden it's like, well, I'm only looking at this one piece of data, this piece of data. And now we're getting complaints of like, well, we took this thing that was so easy for me to move through, now I can only see one thing at a time. So we removed the friction, but now we get just as many complaints on the other side.
Yeah. That's a good one. I think the best thing, sometimes what you need to do when you're in that kind of situation is actually sit down and watch some customers actually try to get the job done using your application. And you can kind of start detecting some frustration points along the way. And you might have to do a compromise. Maybe you have the initial screen is simpler, but there's a button to quickly go see the big picture, so that the guys that want all that extra data can get to it very easily. But yeah, I would probably spend some time kind of maybe either you or somebody on your team watching the people using the app and seeing if you can find out where are those points where they're getting stuck. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming.